Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Julia Dixon Evans. I am the KPBS Arts Calendar Editor and producer, and I am a huge fan of Call the Midwife. I had two children born with midwives myself, so this show has a very special place in my heart. And also joining us today, we have Stephen McGann. You know him as Dr. Turner. He's one of the original characters in this series. Also joining us is Megan Cusack, who plays Nancy Corrigan, one of the nurses.
Hello.
Thank you.
And they are joining us from across the pond, so it is evening for them.
Not only across the pond, but I'm in England and Megan's in Ireland, so it's all getting a bit pan-European. It's quite a thing.
Hence why it looks quite dark around me. I am in the car. We've pulled over though, so hopefully it means that there's no trouble with Wi-Fi. That's the goal.
So we're going to get started with some questions, and I would also like to prompt you all in the audience to add your own questions. There is a Q&A option in the bottom of your Zoom window, so be sure to use that rather than the chat window, or we may not see them. So please use the Q&A one. But we'll get started. I have a couple of questions for both Stephen and Megan. First of all, this is something that is on my mind every single episode I watch, and that is, where do you find all the babies? Is this something you know?
It's incredible, isn't it? When we first began, it was a very strange request. What anybody, of course, who watches the show, like we hope everybody here does, our babies are very young. And it's not a trivial thing to go out and ask mums if they'd like their babies to be a part of the show. When we first began our six-parter in season 1, it was a strange request, which we literally, as a production, used to pin up in hospitals. So mums who were pregnant, you would say, oh, look, we're the BBC. We want to make a television program. Would you come along and use your newborn? And it must have seemed very strange. A few people came along, we got enough newborns. Once the show came out and was a big success, we've never had any trouble since, because people just want the whole day out. And mums are always a major part of it anyway. And so we have a large queue, and we have an agency that books them in, and they're very clever. What they do is they book well in advance. And then, so some of these little newborns are only 10 days old. And the best thing they do is they get, if they can, identical twins, because you can only, due to rightfully very strict rules, you can only use a baby for about 20 minutes on the set, which is no time at all in film time. But if you've got identical twins, you swap one baby out for another one. And so you can use the twins and they look the same, and you get 40 minutes or more, and then you have to rest them. But that's what we do. We have a large queue of people who just say, oh, and sometimes they write to us, some mums who aren't with the agency write to us and say, oh, please let my little one be on Call the Midwife. I'd love that. It's very sweet.
One of the first mums I ever met, I think I asked her because I didn't know, and she was like, I just saw an ad on Facebook.
Oh.
And that's how she'd found out about it. I was like, fair enough. Absolutely. Why not?
I've never seen those ads. I've never seen.
Neither have I.
Yeah, hey, it could be
yeah,
you.
that's what she said.
Yeah, wow.
So Megan, you joined the cast in season 10 as pupil midwife Corrigan, and she burst into the show full of energy, but she was also really complicated. I just want to hear what it was like joining the cast with that character.
Well, what was interesting was I joined not knowing any of the complications that she was going to come across. So I sort of started and I was like, oh, she's fun. She wears some, subtle clothing, nothing too overstated, likes beige, and just, she kind of has no filter. And then suddenly I was reading, I think the second episode that I had ever filmed. I was reading the script for it, and there was just this one line in it that kind of made my brain go, oh, I feel like there's something there. And I went to Annie, our wonderful producer, and I said, is there something happening? Because there's this line about a baby, and it feels like it feels like that's heavier than what it could be. And she was like, yeah, well, actually, you've had a pretty hard life. So you're an orphan. You had a baby when you were 14, and have had a terrible time, really. I was like, oh, great. Okay, cool. So the lightheartedness I was playing in the first episode may be a bit presumptuous. But but here we are. But I mean, it was gorgeous. I think she's a great character. I think she's very, very funny. I mean, when I first read the breakdown to my dad, who's sat right next to me, he laughed at how typecast it was. You know, no good with her studies, terrible with routine. No filter. Kind of all rang true.
Yeah.
I think she's a little bit worse than me. I'd like to think she's a little bit worse than me, but I can't say.
And here's a question for both of you. Call the Midwife is based on the memoirs of Jennifer Worth, as you all know, but it's gone on quite a bit longer than that source material. And I'm wondering if you have a favorite storyline or something that has stuck with you from the run of the show, whether you were involved with it or not.
Yeah, I have to say, and it's not just coincidence with the Christmas episode, but I have to say that the involvement with the thalidomide scandal has been a huge thing. It's been one I've been very privileged and proud to play, because Turner's involvement in that, he feels the guilt. He feels on behalf of medicine. He feels it very keenly, as you saw in that little preview. And you've revisited. It's been one of those few stories that we've revisited, because what's really important in the thalidomide scandal as it affected Europe, and I know thanks to heroics in the medicine of the North Americans and the United States, you basically avoided it, except for one or two rare cases. But it ravaged Britain and Europe and Australia. Now, with the involvement, it was so important when it came along in '61. Turner's involvement was so keen as a medic who was always very enthusiastic about the fact that medicine always did the right thing. It was big, it was good, it was going to solve every problem in the world, because he's an enthusiast, Turner. And when this great negation came, this great loss of innocence, if you like, we followed this family, the Mullocks, ever since. This is our second revisit to the Mullocks. So Christmas is very special for that. And when you see the whole of the Christmas special, you'll see how that unfolds. But that's my favorite storyline, if favorite's the right word. It's the one where I feel it in my heart, because I remember these kids when I was growing up myself. I remember them in my streets playing as children. And I have friends who are injured by thalidomide now, thanks to the program we've made and their association with our scripts and programs, as we've befriended people, and we have good firm friends now. So it's a really close part for me. How about you, Megan?
Now, see, I'm terrible at these kind of things because I can't remember anything. You know, it's like when someone asks you, what was your favorite part of filming this year? And I go, oh, well, what year are we in? And what have we done this year? And what's part of what?
Well, I remember. I can so distinctly. You remember saying your favorite part was everything with Dr. Turner in, because he was gorgeous.
Yeah, no,
I remember you saying that.
They're always quite strong when they're with Dr. Turner. You know, they stick in the memory.
All right, that's it. That'll be it then. Can I just fangirl for a moment for Megan, watching that preview, which I watched the whole of it with everybody, and I just love the way you wind Trixie up. I think this is the most brilliant thing. The way you wind Trixie up is the best. You've got this gentle way with Trixie, and then you've got Matthew wrapped around your little finger. I love that scene so much with the ring. How great is that?
I love the relationship between Nancy and Matthew.
Yeah,
I think it's great. You know, me and Ollie talk about it quite a lot, and you know, she doesn't she doesn't have any airs and graces around him. It's like, you're being a bit thick. You know, pull your thumb out, do better. And she has no qualms about saying that to him. So and I think especially, you know, in this coming series, I feel like it develops even more, and I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah.
But bless you, that's very kind.
So from our audience members, we actually had a couple of follow-up questions to the Susan Mullock storyline. The first is from Stacy, who is a mother of a disabled daughter, and she found it so well researched, and Rhoda's portrayal of the role of a mother of a disabled child is so accurate. And Stacy had asked, what went into planning for that Susan Millick storyline?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Thanks, Stacey. The event was such a big one. When we first started with Liz and Chris, who play mum and dad, when you do something as big as this, and what we do as a policy on Call the Midwife, there's not just accuracy in medicine. There's the bigger sense of accuracy about social accuracy, as it were. You're not just looking to see how these children were damaged. And in Susan's case, she's what's known as four-limb deficient. And we know about all the medicine, and we got all the doctors to check the medicine. But what was the most crucial part was bringing in the Thalidomide Society in Great Britain, because they would tell you how it felt to be a child, how it felt to grow up. Because, of course, put very simply, but if you're the mother of a child who has a disability, you'll know this. But the thing is, we can do a drama episode, but we don't pass by in the street and go on to something else. The people who suffered from this thing were about 6 or 7 years older than me. And I know them now, they're in their 60s. They've had this, it's every day to them, it's not a drama. And so the least you can do as a drama is get into their lives and try to understand it from their social point of view. So bringing the Thalidomide Society in from the earliest possible stage was the best thing we could have done. And out of that grew this Christmas story. Without telling you too much, you haven't seen it all, because we now see Susan played by lovely little Emily, and she's quite an old, she's 8 or 9 now. So we've watched Susan as a toddler, we've seen her as a newborn, but they tell us, they call themselves the thalidomiders. The thalidomiders tell us that they used to hate these legs that they used to give them. What used to happen was they would give them artificial legs to wear, which looked like ordinary legs, but were terribly unwieldy and uncomfortable. And they quickly realized, these kids, they don't want us to walk better. They just don't want to feel so embarrassed to have us around. Because back in those days, anybody with a disability, they tended to want to hide away. So what they were trying to do to children like Susan by this point is get them to walk on sort of imitation legs. But these kids who didn't have any natural legs had learned by this point to repurpose their limbs, their spines, their bodies, and they could whiz across the floor like you saw in the scene. Susan could walk herself, and they can paint with their feet, and fantastically. One of my mate Ed, who has thalidomide, he's a brilliant artist, but he paints with his feet. And so they didn't need these artificial legs. It's a funny thing. They were trying to make society feel a bit easier about them being around. And we challenged that in the episode. And it's all about going back in time, asking the real people who live with this every day, well, how did you really feel? What was it like to be brother and sister? What was it like to be mum and dad? And the mother is the key thing. Ever since the beginning, we have always focused on what it was like for the whole family, because all of those people were affected by the injury of that drug, and none less than Liz herself, who plays Rhoda Mullix. And we've always included that as a really central part, because that's a vital part of it.
Thank you. Switching gears a little, here's one more question from the audience. This is from Jessica. Public health nerd question is how she introduces it. Since the 60s saw the rise of environmentalism, will we see any plot lines involving the impact of pollution on health? And she also apologized if that's a spoiler question, if you can't answer it. But yeah, is that something that we're going to start seeing discussed in Poplar?
Megan.
Again,
We're not,
well,
really.
no, see,
No.
I don't think so. I don't think it does. I don't think there are any spoilers in that. I don't think I will ruin anything.
No.
But I don't think, not as of yet.
Not as a, now that's a really, what I find is really, really interesting question. I can honestly say that when I'm finished chatting to you people, I'll go and mention it to a woman who lives in my house who just happens to write the series, because she will probably reply to that interesting question. Oh, that's interesting. The environmental movement was kicking off. What we found over the years, she may have even thought of it before. She may have an answer to that question. But the thing is that it's finding those trigger points for these movements and how they might have come into this neighborhood, and whether it's been the change in the ethnic nature of the population, or the change in women's rights, or the change in working rights, or the environmental effects of bad housing we've covered many times. We've covered environment and pollution where it affects human health directly in places where we've worked on the docks and handling goods and causing things like anthrax. So we've done those, but the wider implications of planetary health as well, and the wider environmental implications, is a really interesting one, and one I will definitely mention.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see that and how it did affect the time and everything.
Yeah.
Here is a question from Robin, who started watching the show in fall of 2020 and can never forget the amazing ways the shows mirrored the COVID epidemic, the outbreaks, quarantine, hand washing, waiting for a vaccine hesitation. These things all came up in the show with typhus, polio, and measles. Megan, I'm wondering, since you also started the show during that time also, what was it like taking on this healthcare series during a pandemic?
It's going to sound really bad, but I was having a wonderful time. I know we were in the midst of this horrible thing, but it was really a shining light for me during it. I mean, it was very bizarre. I hadn't really done any TV, and we're all there in masks and all sorts, and you're not allowed touch. So it was very bizarre, especially when, you know, someone's there in pain giving birth. You really want to hold their hand, but you're sort of standing back going, go on, you just keep going, push the baby out, I'll catch it. So, but I mean, that was what the incredible camera crew and directors and DOPs all worked around to make it look like we were still truly hands-on with all these camera angles, which was incredible. And that's what I was most impressed by, really, was how you know, everyone involved in the show still managed to make it, you know, I don't think you could see COVID in our show. You know, I don't think, I think, you know, obviously there'd be little moments, but you'd watch it and you were still immersed in the story rather than looking and going, they're not allowed touch. You can see they can't touch.
Megan, can I pay tribute to you with something as well, darling? When Megan came on this show, just to think about that for a second, this is a young actor who hadn't really done television before and landed in a global pandemic. And I have to tell you just how difficult the conditions were. She couldn't touch anybody. So for the first years on the show, she couldn't touch anybody. She couldn't lift a baby up. She couldn't touch a patient like a normal actor would normally be able to do. And to try and describe how difficult some of it was, we weren't allowed to face each other nearer than 2 meters apart. What have you got? That's about 8 feet, about 8 feet apart. Now, in some of the small rooms we filmed in, it's frankly ridiculous because 8 feet apart we were all
wall to wall.
We were wall to wall. We were trying to do scenes, and if one character moved, all the others would have to move like pieces on a board, because these were the strictures. The only way we could operate within the restrictions of COVID and safety measures was to do these terrible things. But I do sympathize also with you, Megan, that it was, you know, it was a job, and you were able to go into work. I think we all appreciated however that people outside were having it, like the real nurses and nurses that were having it much.
Oh my God, absolutely.
And so we felt very lucky, incredibly lucky to be working, you know, and
absolutely.
We've never forgotten that. And this year, just as a little final piece to that, the baby that you see born there in this Christmas special, they were the first babies outside of COVID restrictions. This is the first time you're seeing us back to normal as we were, where Megan can diss Matthew nice and close rather than 8 feet away.
Straight up in the face. But I remember, Stephen, you say, like, you remind me there of like the thing of, and everyone would have to shift, you know, if one person moved. I remember a particular scene where it was me, you, and I think another nurse and a woman in bed. And it was like, it would be like, well, on Stephen's line, he has to look here. So if Megan, I went, oh, I'll look at my book for that line, because it was, you know, it it was a whole production just figuring out how to get people's face in the right positions for the right
Yeah.
times for the right lines without
Yeah.
breaking the 2 meter rule.
Mm.
And now it's so easy.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's so much. It's everything goes so much quicker, and
Yeah.
it's so much more relaxed now in that
Yeah.
sense. You
Yeah.
go in and just sit right
Yeah.
next to someone.
It's just the simple pleasures of it, acting like you originally intended to act, you know. It's
Yeah,
such a huge difference. It was a real technical challenge, wasn't it? Mm.
it
So
was at
Megan talked
times.
a,
I mean, I was oh, sorry.
go ahead, go ahead.
Oh no, please you. I was waffling.
Let's moving on. Are we done? Well,
Yeah.
Megan talked a little bit earlier about some of the characteristics of Nancy that she has. And I'm wondering, Stephen, about Dr. Turner as a character and
Yeah.
what you find to be his best qualities and how you approach becoming him in this role.
Yeah. When the National Health Service in Great Britain started in 48, Turner's backstory was he was sort of my father's age. My father was born 1924. He was born before the age of antibiotics, when a cut from a rose thorn or a scratch could literally kill you because it become infected. You get sepsis and you die. Now everybody's very spoiled with antibiotics now, and we overuse them. But my father was born in those days. My father served, he was on D-Day in the Second World War. But Turner served in Italy, the backstory of the character. He was shell-shocked in Italy, and so he's got a very special connection to issues of mental health because he was in a pioneering hospital in Birmingham, England, which really existed at the time towards the end of the war, which had a different group approach to solving those trauma problems before post-traumatic stress disorder was really understood. A few years afterwards, what happened is the British came home, people like my father, a bit wrecked from their experiences, but alive. And the promise, the payoff to the promise for World War II for the British was the National Health Service. And so Turner was one of the early evangelists for this. Turner is someone, so long answer to your question, Turner is someone who embodies the enthusiasms and the passion and the clinically applied compassion that reflects through the community of these things. He believes he suddenly has the best weapons we've ever had. He has vaccination programs. He has this thing called penicillin, which is beating everything. We couldn't win a battle, and suddenly we're winning all these battles. And right up until thalidomide in 61, there were no real reversals. And so he is a part. When I go into work, I play someone of deep, deep compassion, someone vulnerable because they were war affected, someone who understands what it's like to lose people because he lost his first wife and he was a widower when Sheila met him. Someone who understands vulnerability, but somebody who wants passionately to serve, to bring people full health, to bring them the promise that he saw through battle of their deliverance. And so he's someone who carries that, and he's not afraid to be enthusiastic and compassionate. That's who he is.
And one more before we go is kind of like final thoughts.
Mhm.
Why is a show like this so enduring? Why do you think the show has stayed so popular for so long?
Megan.
I think it is because it touches people. It really hits on things that will have been part of lots of people's lives. It's relationships, it's families, it's ups, it's downs. So many people say that it feels like a hug when they're watching. And I think especially through times like lockdowns and something, it's really, really lovely to have a show that you can sit down and watch and feel like the characters, and like you're sat down watching some of your family. And it's just a bit of a hug. Someone described it as a hug to me
Yeah.
a couple of weeks ago, and it's nice. That's what people want. People want to escape when they watch TV, when they watch shows. But also there's like some groundedness in it that makes people, I think, feel they can connect with it on a more on a higher level, a more human level than other things as well.
I think that's absolutely right. I think on that point Megan made, it's the catharsis of it. People have often said to me, it's great British television and its cynicism. They look at your figures, they look at your audience, your ratings, and they see, well, oh, it's a big hit show. People have approached me, they've approached my wife, and they said, you know, what's your trick? All those people crying, come on, how'd you do it? Like it's a magic trick. People make people cry. The answer to that is I cried 3 times in this Christmas special. I kid you not, I cried 3 times. Heidi said, how many times? I said 3 times. She said, which? That's it, I kid you not. But I cried 3 times because we share something. I'm not just being cute, but the audience and us as well. We share something. What it is heart. Is people would not watch it if it didn't speak something to them. And my answer to the question of, come on, what kind of trick are you pulling here, you guys, and make this program? The answer is no, we're not. The people make the people cry, and they come because they care. And if you're crying when you watch this show, if you're following along, it's because of your quality as a person, because it's answering something about what you want community to be. And it goes deep with everyone. And that's why what Megan said about it touches on this other level. That's it. It's not some cheap circus trick. It's about humanity. It's about community. It's about community. And at the end of the day, you begin with women and babies, but you spread out to family, to neighborhood. You spread out and you say at the end of the day, who do we want to be? How do we want to feel about the people next to us? The big people, the small people, how do we feel about that? How do we want to feel? And if by the end it's made you cry, it's because, you know what, there's probably something really nice inside you that does that. But it's no trick of ours, because we join in that. We tell these stories like you do. And when you watch them, we tell them, but the stories themselves, they have their own ability to make us care. And I think that's Heidi's genius, actually. I think that's what it is.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. I totally agree. He's
Thank
very
you so
articulate, Stephen. Me less so.
Well, I apologize that we're not able to get to all of these great questions from the audience. We are out of time. You all can see the full episode of the Call the Midwife Holiday Special on KPBS on December 25th at 9 p.m. And it will also be available to stream with the PBS app through January 24th. And if you want, you can also rewatch previous holiday specials on Passport from 2018 through 2021. And yeah, thank you so much to Stephen McGann and Megan Cusack, our special guests for this very special Call the Midwife event. This was so fun.
Yeah, thank you everybody for coming.
And KPBS would not exist without support from members like you. Thank you so much. We have more Directors Club and Producers Club events coming up in 2023. So please look out for more information about them in your email box. It's been really great to connect with everyone and to read all of your questions and comments. And I hope to see you in many more member events. Have a really lovely holiday season.